Researchers once sat professional referees down, showed them the exact same foul, twice, and got two different verdicts. Same players. Same contact. Same replay. The only thing that changed was whether they could hear a crowd roaring in the background. That's it. That's the whole experiment. And the fact that it worked, that trained professionals who watch fouls for a living can be quietly rewired by noise they're not even supposed to be listening to, should terrify anyone who thinks football is decided purely on the pitch. Because here's the question nobody wants to sit with: if a referee's judgment can be bent by sound alone, how much of football history has actually been fair? Start with the noise itself. In that landmark study, officials watched identical incidents under two conditions: full stadium audio, and silence. Nothing else changed. Yet the crowd noise alone was enough to shift decisions toward whichever side was making the most sound. Not the better team. Not the more disciplined team. The louder one. It sounds almost too simple to be true, until you realize it explains something every football fan has felt but never quite been able to prove: why decisions always seem to bend toward the home end late in a game, in stadium after stadium, season after season. And once you know noise can do that to a referee's brain, a strange follow-up question emerges: does the shape of the stadium itself change the outcome of matches? It turns out, yes. Researchers compared stadiums where fans sit right on top of the pitch to stadiums with a running track separating supporters from the players, a small, boring architectural detail nobody ever thinks about. But in the data, that gap mattered. Grounds with more physical distance between crowd and referee showed measurably less home bias. Which means, in a very real sense, some clubs have been quietly disadvantaged for decades simply because of how far back their seats are built. Not their tactics. Not their transfer budget. Concrete. So sound bends decisions. Distance changes outcomes. But the strangest discovery isn't about what referees see or hear, it's about something they fully control: the clock. Stoppage time isn't fixed. It's a judgment call, added on at the end, in the referee's own head, under pressure, in real time. And when researchers dug into hundreds of matches, they found stoppage time swinging by almost 2 full minutes depending purely on the score. When the home team was losing, they got significantly more time to find an equalizer. The moment they leveled it, that extra time evaporated. The clock wasn't neutral. The clock was reacting. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this pattern doesn't stay confined to home advantage. In Spain, researchers found the exact same effect attached to something else entirely: a club's size. Big clubs, specifically, got more added time when they were behind in close games, and less when they were ahead. Take away home advantage completely and the bias was still there, just wearing a different disguise. It wasn't about who was playing in their own stadium anymore. It was about who the club was. Which raises an obvious question: is any of this deliberate, or is it just human nature reacting to pressure and reputation? For a while, the honest answer was, nobody could really separate the two. Then the pandemic did it for us. When stadiums emptied out and matches were suddenly played in total silence, scientists got the cleanest natural experiment football has ever produced. No crowd. No noise. No pressure. And home bias dropped. Not eliminated completely, but measurably reduced, hard proof that at least some of this favoritism wasn't corruption at all. It was psychology, quietly working on referees who never even realized they were being influenced. So if some of this bias is innocent, an unconscious reaction to crowd noise, what happens when it stops being innocent? What happens when someone starts pulling the strings on purpose? That question has an answer, and it comes from Italy. Investigators were originally chasing something completely unrelated: a doping inquiry inside one of the country's most successful clubs. But wiretaps meant for one scandal exposed a different one entirely. Recorded phone calls revealed a senior club director discussing, openly, which referees should be sent to specific matches. Not hoping. Not complaining after the fact. Deciding, in advance, who would officiate, and how that official's history made them a favorable choice. In one of those calls, the director wanted a specific referee removed just days before kickoff. In another, a request went out for a gift meant for someone tied to those refereeing appointments: a 4-door Maserati. Not an envelope of cash. A car. Specific, almost theatrical in its audacity, The kind of detail that sounds invented until you realize it's sitting in an actual legal record. And it didn't stop at phone calls. According to multiple accounts, at least one referee was confronted and confined inside a dressing room after officiating a match that didn't go the right way. Not shouted at from the stands. Not criticized in a press conference. Physically kept in a room by people connected to the club that lost the decision. You'd think a scandal like that would be a singular, shocking exception. It wasn't. Decades later, a completely different case emerged in Spain, and this one wasn't measured in weeks or months, it stretched across 17 years. A major club is alleged to have made payments to a former vice president of the National Refereeing Committee, year after year, across almost 2 decades, with investigators now going back through match after match, cataloging individual incidents one by one. Not a single bribe. Not one rigged game. A relationship, sustained quietly, for the better part of a generation. And even now, with all our technology, with cameras everywhere and video review meant to catch exactly this kind of injustice, the opacity hasn't disappeared. It's just moved. In one modern controversy, the video review team reportedly had 5 separate camera angles of a disputed handball inside the box. 5. The on-field referee was shown 2 of them. The angles that might have told a different story simply weren't presented, at the exact moment they would have mattered most. So after the noise, the stadiums, the stopwatch, the wiretaps, the car, the locked door, and the camera angles nobody saw, where does that leave the idea that football is a level playing field? Maybe the uncomfortable truth is that fairness in football was never a guarantee. It was always a variable, shaped by how loud a crowd can get, how close they're allowed to sit, how much time a referee decides to add, and, sometimes, by people working quietly in the background long before the whistle ever blows. The scoreboard tells you who won. It rarely tells you why.